"Don't show up," my father warned. But when I did, the whole family turned. My name is Helena Rodriguez Santos. I'm 35 years old, and I've been a registered nurse in Austin, Texas, for the past 12 years. But nursing was never enough to support everyone who needed me. So 3 years ago, I started my own home health care agency. People always ask me how I managed to work 70-hour weeks while running a business. And I tell them it's simple. When you're the family's safety net, you don't get to choose your hours. I should have seen the warning signs that December morning when my phone buzzed at 5 a.m. Dad never called that early, unless someone was dying or someone needed money. This time, his voice carried a strange tension I'd never heard before. "Helena, mija, listen to me carefully. Don't show up tomorrow. Just don't come to the lawyer's office." I was standing in my kitchen, coffee mug halfway to my lips, trying to process what he'd just said. Tomorrow was the reading of Grandpa Eduardo's will, something our family had been dreading and anticipating for months since his passing. "What do you mean, don't show up, Dad? I'm supposed to be there. Grandpa specifically mentioned me in his final letter. I remember the weight of that letter in my hands just weeks before, his shaky handwriting telling me how proud he was of the woman I'd become. But Dad's response sent a chill down my spine. "Trust me on this one, Helena. It's better for everyone if you just stay away. The family thinks it's best. The family thinks it's best." Those words would echo in my mind for the next 24 hours. I'd been hearing variations of that phrase my entire adult life. The family thinks it's best if you pay for Miguel's college tuition. The family thinks it's best if you cover Mom's medical bills. The family thinks it's best if you send money for Dad's truck payment. Always what the family thought was best. Never what was fair. Never what I wanted. But this felt different. There was something in Dad's voice, a guilt that he was trying to mask with authority. I found myself thinking about the last conversation I'd had with Grandpa Eduardo in the hospital. He'd gripped my hand with surprising strength for a 92-year-old man and whispered, "Mija, you've given too much of yourself away. Promise me you'll remember who you are when the time comes." I'd thought he was talking about grief, about not losing myself in sadness after he passed. Now I wondered if he meant something else entirely. As I drove to work that morning, my mind drifted to the past 15 years of my life. How I'd postponed my own dreams of getting my nurse practitioner degree because my brother Carlos needed help with his DUI legal fees. How I'd never taken that trip to Spain I'd been saving for because my sister Maria's wedding couldn't wait. And of course, who else would pay for the reception? How I'd lived in the same small apartment for 8 years, not because I couldn't afford better, but because every extra dollar went to someone else's emergency. The emergency that was never really an emergency. The desperate need that somehow always coincided with my paycheck. I pulled into the hospital parking lot feeling something shift inside my chest, something that felt dangerously close to clarity. That evening, I called in sick for my second shift and spent the night going through old text messages, bank statements, and emails. What I found made my stomach turn. For the past 3 years, while I'd been working myself to exhaustion, my family had been living quite comfortably. Carlos had bought a new Harley Davidson 6 months after I'd helped him with those desperate legal fees. Maria had posted Instagram photos from Cancun just weeks after crying to me about not being able to pay her rent. But the real kick in the gut came when I scrolled through Mom's Facebook posts. Photos of family dinners at expensive restaurants, shopping trips, weekend getaways to Galveston, all happening while she'd been calling me monthly about struggling to pay for her medications. I sat there in my living room, surrounded by takeout containers and old medical journals, realizing that I'd been funding a lifestyle that I wasn't even invited to enjoy. The family thinks it's best if you don't show up. Now I understood why. 3 months earlier, I'd gotten a strange call from Grandpa Eduardo's attorney, asking if I knew anything about property he'd mentioned leaving to me. I told him no, that I wasn't expecting anything, that Grandpa had already given me enough by believing in me when no one else did. But now, sitting in the darkness of my apartment, I realized there was more to this story, and tomorrow, whether Dad wanted me there or not, I was going to find out exactly what the family thought was best for everyone but me. The next morning, I woke up with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. I put on my best navy blue suit, the one I'd bought for business meetings but rarely had occasion to wear, and drove downtown to the law offices of Morrison and Associates. My hands weren't shaking as I pulled into the parking garage. My heart wasn't racing as I rode the elevator to the 15th floor. For the first time in as long as I could remember, I wasn't rushing to fix someone else's problem or clean up someone else's mess. I was simply showing up for myself. The receptionist seemed surprised to see me, checking her appointment book twice before buzzing me through to the conference room. As I walked down the hallway, I could hear familiar voices through the frosted glass door. My entire family was already there. Mom, Dad, Carlos, Maria, and even my Aunt Rosa, who usually only appeared when money was involved. They were talking in the animated, comfortable way people do when they think they're among friends who share the same secret. I took a deep breath, turned the handle, and stepped into the room. The conversation stopped so abruptly that the silence felt like a physical weight. Every single head turned toward me with expressions I'd never seen before. Not surprise, not confusion, but something much more complex. Carlos's face went pale. Maria actually gasped. Dad's jaw tightened in that way it did when he was trying to control his anger. And Mom looked like she wanted to disappear into her chair. Helena, the attorney, Mr. Morrison, said warmly, rising from his seat. I'm so glad you could make it. Your grandfather specifically requested that you be here for this reading. He gestured to an empty chair directly across from my family, and I realized the seating arrangement wasn't accidental. I wasn't meant to sit with them. I was meant to face them. As I settled into my chair, I caught Dad's eye. He looked away immediately, but not before I saw something that made my chest tighten. Shame. Raw, unmistakable shame. I told her not to come, he muttered to Mom, loud enough for me to hear. This is going to make everything complicated. Mr. Morrison cleared his throat and opened a thick folder. Before we begin with the formal reading of Eduardo Santos' last will and testament, I have been instructed to share a letter he wrote specifically for this occasion. He pulled out an envelope with my name written in Grandpa's familiar handwriting. He requested that Helena read this aloud to the family before we proceed. I took the envelope with steady hands, though inside I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff. The paper was thick, expensive, the kind Grandpa always used for important documents. As I unfolded the letter, I noticed my family leaning forward despite themselves, their earlier discomfort replaced by obvious curiosity. They had no idea what was coming. None of us did. My dearest Helena, I began, my voice clear and strong. If you're reading this letter, it means you had the courage to show up, despite what I'm sure were strong suggestions that you stay away. Good. I raised you to be brave, even when bravery is inconvenient for others. I paused, glancing up at faces that were now completely focused on my words. For the past 15 years, I have watched you give and give and give, while others in this family have taken and taken and taken. I have watched you sacrifice your dreams, your comfort, and your peace of mind for people who have mistaken your kindness for weakness. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Carlos shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Maria was staring down at her hands, but I kept reading, because Grandpa's voice was coming through these words, and he'd never led me astray. I have also watched this family lie to you repeatedly about their financial situations while living comfortably off your generosity. I know about the secret family dinners you were never invited to. I know about the vacations taken with money meant for emergencies. I know about the investments made with funds they claimed were for basic necessities. My voice wavered slightly, but I pushed through. Most importantly, I know that they plan to exclude you from this will reading because they believe you have already received enough from the family, when in reality, you have been the one giving everything to everyone else. The silence in the room was deafening. Dad had his head in his hands. Mom was crying quietly. Carlos looked like he might be sick, but I wasn't finished yet. Helena, my dear granddaughter, you have spent your entire adult life being this family's safety net. Today, I want you to know that someone was your safety net too. Someone was watching, someone was planning, and someone believed you deserved so much more than you were getting. I folded the letter carefully and looked up at Mr. Morrison, who was watching the family's reactions with the detached interest of a man who had seen these dramas play out many times before. Now, he said, opening the official will document, let's proceed with the reading of Eduardo Santos' last will and testament. What happened next would replay in my mind for years to come. Mr. Morrison began listing the bequests. $10,000 to Carlos, $5,000 to Maria, small amounts to various cousins. Then came the significant assets. The family house in San Antonio, valued at $400,000, the family business accounts, the investment portfolio that none of us knew existed, and to my granddaughter, Helena Rodriguez Santos, who has embodied the values of hard work, sacrifice, and integrity that I tried to instill in this family. I leave the remainder of my estate. Mr. Morrison's voice carried clearly through the stunned silence. This includes the primary residence at 1247 Maple Street, valued at approximately $850,000. The entirety of my investment accounts totaling approximately $2.3 million, and my final business, Santos Property Management, which currently manages 47 rental properties throughout Central Texas. I heard Maria gasp. Carlos made a sound like he'd been punched, but Mr. Morrison wasn't finished. Additionally, Eduardo Santos has left specific instructions regarding debts owed to Helena Rodriguez Santos by family members. According to his detailed records, the family collectively owes Helena approximately $137,000 in loans that were never repaid, gifts that were falsely represented as emergencies, and expenses that were promised to be temporary assistance. He looked directly at my parents. Eduardo has forgiven these debts as part of his final gift to Helena, so that she may start fresh, without the burden of resentment. The room erupted. Carlos started shouting about the will being unfair, that Grandpa must have been manipulated in his final years. Maria was crying and insisting there had been some mistake. Dad was demanding to see the documents, his voice rising with each word. Mom just sat there, staring at me with an expression I couldn't read. But I remained perfectly calm. I listened to their protests, their accusations, their desperate attempts to make sense of a reality that didn't center around their needs and wants. And for the first time in my adult life, their chaos didn't become my emergency. Their problems didn't become my responsibility to solve. Mr. Morrison raised his hand for silence. There's one more thing. Eduardo Santos included a provision that states, if any family member contests this will or attempts to manipulate Helena regarding her inheritance, their individual bequests will be donated entirely to charity. The room fell silent again. He was very specific about this. He wanted to ensure Helena could enjoy her inheritance without family pressure or guilt. As we left the law office that day, my family barely looked at me. They huddled together in the parking garage, whispering furiously among themselves. I heard fragments. She knew this whole time. How could she let us? We need to figure out how to... But their words felt like background noise from a life I was no longer living. I drove home to my small apartment and sat in the quiet for a long time. I thought about the scared young woman I'd been at 20, so desperate to be needed and valued that I'd confused being used with being loved. I thought about all the dreams I'd deferred and the goals I'd abandoned in service of keeping everyone else comfortable. And I thought about Grandpa Eduardo, who'd apparently been watching it all, documenting it all, and planning his own form of justice. 3 days later, I submitted my 2 weeks' notice at the hospital. Not because I was angry or hurt, but because I finally had the freedom to pursue the nurse practitioner program I'd always wanted. I enrolled at the University of Texas for the spring semester, something I'd been saying I would do someday for the past 8 years. A week after that, Carlos called me crying, asking if I could loan him money for his mortgage payment. The old Helena would have asked how much and transferred the funds immediately. The new Helena said simply, "I'm sorry you're struggling, but I'm not in a position to help right now." It was the first time I'd ever said no to a family financial request, and the words felt foreign in my mouth, but they also felt true. Maria tried a different approach, showing up at my apartment with grocery store flowers and a long speech about family loyalty and forgiveness. She never actually apologized for lying to me or taking advantage of my generosity. She just expected me to understand that family comes first, which had always been code for Helena's needs come last. I listened to her entire speech, offered her coffee, and then explained that I was focusing on my own goals for the first time in my adult life. I told her I loved her, but I wouldn't be the family bank anymore. She left confused and angry, unable to understand how someone could choose their own well-being over everyone else's convenience. The hardest conversation was with my parents. Dad eventually called to apologize, not for trying to exclude me from the will reading, but for how everything turned out. He said he'd been trying to protect family harmony, that he'd thought it would be easier if I just didn't know about the inheritance. He couldn't understand why Grandpa had chosen to create division in the family by giving me so much. I realized then that he genuinely believed my inheritance was the problem, not the 15 years of financial manipulation that had preceded it. In his mind, the family had been perfectly harmonious when everyone understood their roles. Me as the giver, everyone else as the receiver. The will hadn't created division. It had simply revealed the inequality that had always existed. 6 months later, I graduated from my nurse practitioner program with highest honors. I opened my own clinic in East Austin, focusing on providing affordable health care to underserved communities. For the first time in my life, I was using my resources to build something that reflected my values. The family relationship slowly rebuilt, but on completely different terms. Carlos got his life together when he realized no one was going to bail him out anymore. Maria learned to budget and plan instead of relying on emergency loans. My parents and I now have conversations about my life, my goals, my happiness, instead of just my availability to help with the latest crisis. I'm not the family's safety net anymore. And surprisingly, they've all survived just fine without me. It turns out that when you stop enabling people, they often discover they're more capable than they thought. Who would have guessed? Last month, I bought my own house, a beautiful craftsman bungalow with a garden where I can grow the vegetables Grandpa taught me to love. When I was signing the papers, I thought about him and smiled. He'd given me more than money or property. He'd given me permission to value myself the way he'd always valued me. Sometimes people ask me if I feel guilty about the inheritance, if I think it was fair that I received so much while others got so little. The old Helena would have apologized and made excuses. The new Helena has a different answer. I spent 15 years giving away pieces of myself to keep everyone else comfortable. Grandpa spent his final years making sure I'd have the resources to put myself back together. If you've been the family's perpetual helper, the friend who always pays, the person everyone calls when they need something, but never when they want to celebrate, I want you to know something. Your worth is not measured by your usefulness to others. Your value doesn't decrease when you stop being convenient. And setting boundaries isn't selfish. It's necessary for your survival. Grandpa Eduardo taught me that love isn't about how much you're willing to sacrifice for others. Real love is about creating space for everyone to grow, including yourself. It's about building relationships based on mutual respect, rather than one-sided convenience. And sometimes, real love means saying no to the people you care about, so they can learn to say yes to themselves. You don't have to show up to every emergency. You don't have to solve every problem. You don't have to give until it hurts, just to prove you care. The people who truly love you will understand when you choose yourself. And the people who don't understand, well, they were never really rooting for your happiness anyway. Your dreams matter. Your goals are valid. Your peace of mind is precious. And you don't owe anyone an explanation for finally deciding to invest in yourself instead of everyone else's comfort. If this story resonates with you, if you've been the family's ATM or the friend group's unpaid therapist, I want you to know you're not alone. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it. Like this post if you've ever struggled with saying no to people you love. Comment below and tell me about a time you chose yourself over everyone else's expectations. Subscribe for more story about finding your voice and keeping your power. Remember, showing up for yourself isn't selfish, it's survival. And you deserve to not just survive, but to thrive.